Today we are taking a look at the latest screen modification for the Game Boy Color, a drop-in AMOLED replacement that will take the original system looking like this to this. And the good news here is that this mod is pretty easy to do. In fact, I would classify it as a great project for a beginner who's never really done a lot of these mods to try out for the first time. And what I'll do here is go through the mod from start to finish and give my thoughts on the final result. So if you enjoy the video, guys, hit the like button and subscribe if you're new here to the channel. Let's start with what you're going to need. First, it should be obvious. You will need a Game Boy Color that's at least functional and able to start up. The screen can be smashed or the casing can be destroyed. Just as long as you know the board is functioning and it's reading games, that's all we really care about here. The AMOLED screen is available on places like eBay, but I usually pick up parts from places like Retro Modding where I've never had an issue with delivery. This isn't a sponsored video by them or anything, but it's just my personal experience from the past few years of ordering. You'll also need one of these funny playing shells since the AMOLED screen is a little bit bigger than the original. You could modify the original shell if you want, but it is a headache to get the correct fit when you're chopping up the case, and it probably won't look as clean as just buying one of these shells for 15 bucks. Also, you can have some fun here and pick whatever color you want to personalize your system. I ended up finding this ghost blue shell that I think looks pretty good paired with the stock buttons. You can, of course, order different A and B buttons along with the D-pad for whatever color combination you want. If you're not going to do that, I would at the very least recommend grabbing some new pads for your Game Boy to replace the near 25-year-old button pads inside. Tools-wise, you're going to need a Phillips head and tri-tip screwdriver, as well as, yes, a soldering iron. Okay, hold on. I know. You hear soldering in a project like this, and you immediately go, nope, that's it. I'm out. Like, it's not for me. But this is probably one of the easiest mods with soldering involved, as there's really just one wire and 2 points to solder to. It's very easy to get to, and it can be done with a basic $10 or $15 iron. So perfect beginner level stuff here. Trust me on this one. That's pretty much it though. At this point, we can start building this AMOLED Game Boy Color. Let's take a look though, starting with the screen. These appear to be repurposed from cell phones, and by using this board to relay information from the motherboard to the screen, we end up with the correct dimensions for the Game Boy Color display when we turn it on. They've also managed to use the touch functionality here for further customization, but we'll talk more about that later on. Around the screen edges are tape strips already installed that will attach to our shell. Removing the film and then sliding the screen in through the front gives us a nice flush fit. I'm curious how this tape will hold up over the course of a year or two, since sometimes it can loosen. You'll have the screen kind of lift up on one side, but for now, it feels pretty solid. On the other side, I'm going to use some Kapton tape that was included with the screen to start shielding some of the metal pieces. This will give the board some extra protection from any potential shorts if it comes in contact with that Game Boy board when we screw it all together. Now we just need to slide the screen cable through the adapter board and then carefully press the connector down into place. At this point, I started to install the buttons and the D-pad at the bottom since we're almost ready to drop the main board in. On the adapter board, there's a point labeled BAT. Solder one end of the included wire here. I set it to then run toward the top of the Game Boy since there's plenty of space there to wrap around. It's a good idea to use more Kapton tape here and cover up some of the chips to help avoid any shorts. On the front side of the board, I noticed the connectors for the cartridge slot were just a little too long for my liking, and it would put added pressure on the screen. In some cases, it caused shorting and wouldn't read a game correctly. I used some metal snips just to kind of clip off the little legs here, just to lower the profile, even by a few millimeters. That will help. It doesn't sound like much, I know, but when you close it all together, you are working with millimeters of clearance at times, and this did make it so that it didn't feel like you were really trying to press it together and there was added pressure. I also added a little bit more Kapton tape here, and I didn't experience any more shorts or anything that was affecting the game being read. This step may be unnecessary for some out there who are doing this mod, but I recommend doing it if you just have some clippers laying around you can use. Now we can drop the board in, being mindful of the cable at the top, along with the IR cover and the power switch. The red wire needs to be routed down to that power switch and soldered to the leg marked C. Then just plug in the screen cable at the top, making sure it's fully locked in and even across, and we can start reassembling, starting with the 3 motherboard screws at the bottom. With the back on, I dropped a couple screws in just to hold everything together, popped in a couple AA batteries to test, and everything looks good here, so the rest of the screws are going in. Also, the shell went together really well for this transparent blue Game Boy. And a lot of times I'll buy a shell for a Game Boy or even like a controller or something, and it just feels cheap. Like it doesn't feel like it's something from the first party manufacturer. This one though is extremely close. I mean, all around the edges, there's no obvious gaps or feels like it's trying to kind of push itself apart with pressure. This turned out really, really nice, and I'm actually pleasantly surprised by that based on some of the experience I've had with other aftermarket shell. But let's play some games on this and see how this OLED screen holds up. To say this is a night and day difference over the stock Game Boy Color screen would be the undersell of the decade here. I mean, look, obviously going from a screen that has no sort of light source from 1998 to an AMOLED screen made more than 20 years later, yes, it's going to be an upgrade. This, however, it's extremely impressive to see in person. I wish it came through better on camera, but trust me, if you think it looks good here, it's even better with it right in front of you. The colors are extremely vibrant and contrast against the inky blacks nicely. This is all stuff you would expect from an OLED display. It definitely looks better here when used with Game Boy Color specific games, since it can take advantage of a wider color palette. And I especially noticed it in something like Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. Those castle levels where half the screen is black really shines here against the bright orange lava at the bottom. I didn't notice any sort of input latency, which does make sense considering AMOLED displays are known for having good response times. There's also been some testing for power draw with this display, and it seems to eat up less power than many of the other LCD mods. Also, I mentioned the touchscreen being intact here, and it's used in a pretty clever way. By pressing and holding down on the screen, you'll bring up a menu after a few seconds. Here you can change the brightness, which scrolls through 10 different levels. I found 10 to be a bit too bright, and I mostly have it sitting at 7 in a normally lit room. 1 is pretty dark, and even in a dark room, it would be hard to see. You can change scanline settings as well here as color modes. I think a few of these would mostly be used for regular Game Boy games, since removing the color from Game Boy Color games looks a bit weird. In order to move to the bottom menu, you swipe up, and here you can change the color of the Game Boy logo at the bottom. And there's like 30 of these different colors to pick from. Only annoying thing is it doesn't cycle back to 1 after getting to the max value, so you have to then cycle all the way back manually. Another section in the menu does let you change the positioning of the screen, just in case maybe it's getting cut off a bit around the edges by the border. The touch function here isn't the most responsive when you're using it, and you'll find yourself pressing a spot over and over and over until it responds just once. It gets the job done, but I think I'd like to see it use the face buttons to scroll through for a future revision. Oh, and the other obvious drawback, you're going to get a lot of fingerprints on that screen. So with all of this said, do I think this AMOLED modification for the Game Boy Color is worth doing? Yes and no. So I think it's worth doing if you already have the core component, which is the Game Boy Color, because at this point, that's probably the most expensive thing you need out of this entire project. Prices around these things have been going up over the past few years, especially as more people are looking for them to do these modifications. So if you already have that, you can do everything here for probably just under $80 if you already have the tools like a soldering iron and screwdriver, that kind of stuff. If you need to get a Game Boy Color, I do wonder if this is a mod worth doing, unless you really, really want this form factor, like outright. It's just, I want the original hardware upgraded. Otherwise, you're going to spend $150 to $200. Then you start looking at things like the Analog Pocket. Maybe you get one of those emulation handhelds or a Game Boy Advance and so on. But if you're looking to upgrade and clean up and basically refurbish a Game Boy Color you already have, I think this is the screen modification to do, and it is certainly a significant upgrade over the stock one. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below, where we now have OLED screens going into a system from more than 25 years ago. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.